Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on increasing vulnerability management program velocity. My name is Dave Gruber. I am a principal industry cybersecurity analyst for the Enterprise Strategy Group. And I'm joined today by Chandra Barsavana, who is the founder and CEO of SecPod. And we're going to have a fairly rich conversation today about what's possible as we look at advanced vulnerability management programs. Welcome and thank you for joining me today, Chandra.
Hey, thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone.
So today we're going to be discussing what I would describe as a transformative approach to one of the most fundamental elements of every security strategy. Vulnerability management's certainly not a new topic, and I would be hard pressed to speak with any security or IT professional who hasn't implemented some level of vulnerability management program, processes, and supporting technologies that are associated with it. As such, this space has had a fairly well-established set of programs that people have been executing on for some time now, and it's core to many of the widely adopted security frameworks in the industry. There are specific callouts for many of the standards and regulations as well around patching and vulnerability assessment identification programs. All that said, there hasn't been a ton of innovation in this space for some time now. There's been a fairly well established set of tools and technologies that are here, which is kind of interesting because in my research, so as an industry analyst, I do regular research across a broad spectrum of sort of company sizes, levels of maturity of both IT and security. And from that research, I continually see that people are struggling with keeping up with both software and configuration and user type vulnerabilities inside of their environment. And I also see that tends to continue to be a leading entry point for attacks in organizations. And in fact, from some recent research that I just wrapped up over the course of the last month, we found that the initial point of compromise for ransomware attacks, the most common entry point was in fact through vulnerabilities in the infrastructure, whether that's application or system vulnerabilities, misconfigured application or user permissions, or misconfigured externally exposed devices. So given that vulnerabilities are the top entry point for cyber attacks, and in this particular data set, this was about ransomware attacks, I went on further to take a look at how people feel about their current vulnerability management programs. And here you see the research tells us that half of organizations report that they have what I would call suboptimal vulnerability management programs, and that is that they have gaps in part of their infrastructure for operating the vulnerability management programs, or they're slow to remediate identified issues within their environment as well. And so given that, seems to be a mismatch in that everybody's investing, everybody's spending time, money, and effort here, yet the results are still substandard, enabling sufficient amounts of attacks to get through that are causing organizations to struggle in this area. So I sort of made an assumption getting started here that everybody would understand what I mean when I say software and configuration vulnerabilities. But let me actually take a step back before I do, because Chandra, I know your organization has spent a tremendous amount of time and energy on this space. And when you think about the whole subject of vulnerable infrastructure, your definition might be bigger than what most people think about when it comes to vulnerabilities. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of what your perspective is about what vulnerable infrastructure looks like and what the attributes of that look like?
Certainly, Dave. Since we're talking about vulnerability management, definitely makes sense to define what vulnerabilities are. And vulnerabilities are some sort of a weakness that attackers could exploit. That's a general definition of what vulnerabilities are. But typically, the understanding that is there in the industry is some sort of a misconception, I would say. Vulnerability would typically be the software vulnerabilities that are there, whether the operating systems or the applications that we have in our IT environment. So could have some sort of a loophole that attackers could exploit. But there are equally important issues which are beyond the software vulnerabilities. So you mentioned about misconfigurations. So majority of the attacks tend to use these misconfigurations that are there in the operating systems and the applications that we use, databases that we use, cloud applications, even browsers, for example. So there are a number of misconfigurations that could essentially be exploited by the attackers to launch attacks. Not only misconfigurations, but even the asset exposure, for example. So you have a number of applications that are installed within the environment. So do you have outdated software? Do you have applications that are not supported by the vendors, like the end of life type of applications? Do you have unauthorized applications that are running, or their shadow IT sort of environment presence? So extending that vulnerability definition even to not having certain critical patches present in the environment could lead to vulnerabilities and those being exploited. But beyond that, you have number of security controls that you may have deployed within the environment. Are they really optimal? Are they really working in a way that you expect them to be? So maybe you've deployed an anti-malware product and it is outdated. Maybe some services that are not running. Maybe there are firewall sets, rules that are not configured properly. Maybe there are strange applications present. Only one person within an organization is using that application. It's a deviation, sort of an anomaly, right? So likewise, there are a number of other security controls, deviations, and anomalies that could equally be exploited by the attackers to launch attacks, not just the software vulnerabilities, which are tracked by the CVE identifiers that the industry is very well accustomed to. So we need to really look at vulnerabilities from this holistic sense and not just software vulnerabilities that are widely known.
So great. So that's a really expanded view, maybe from what some organizations maybe think about as mainstream in their vulnerability management programs. But what I heard you say was this basically is all facets of not only the operational side of IT infrastructure, but also the management side of it as well. And
Yes.
which includes all the security controls, all the IT management tools and environments as well. So anything that's operating within the context of today's very broad and very sophisticated and very diverse IT infrastructure all has to be considered as a potential weakness that might allow attackers in. So maybe that begins to describe the complexity of the problem set in itself, because we sort of just said not only horizontally does this cover everything in the IT infrastructure, but also goes fairly deep when it comes to all the different aspects of both the sort of core business operations and the IT and security side of the house as well, and ensuring that's all intact.
Yes.
Philosophically, I think about vulnerability management as one of attack surface reduction. And as we can tighten up the attack surface or reduce or shrink it, then we limit the amount of entry points that the attackers have to leverage. So let me ask you, so when you think about vulnerability management and patching programs in terms of security strategy, because right, so we often have thought about the sort of broader patch management side as an IT program and a vulnerability assessment as a security program. So take a step back and say, where does vulnerability management and patching fit into broad security strategies?
Yeah. So So if you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, for example, there are 4 or 5 layers. It starts with identify, prevention, detection, response, and recovery. Now, vulnerability management actually fits in identify and prevention, in my view. So there is also a misconception about the term prevention, because typically prevention is associated with preventing an ongoing attack as against preventing the future attack. So this is extremely important and critical to understand the difference here. So there's an attack which is already in our doorstep, and now I'm trying to respond to that. So that's not necessarily prevention. That is more of detection and response. But prevention is, how do I look at the hygiene of the organization? How do I eliminate the attack surface? And how do I shrink that attack surface, as you rightly mentioned, before an attacker could exploit those loopholes that are present within that environment? So prevention is a step much before the actual prevention that is used in the industry today.
So that's interesting. So so what we're doing is we're sort of expanding the definition of prevention. So when I think about what we do as security professionals, I think about it kind of in terms of a funnel. And if you think about the sales funnel, for those of you who have been involved in sort of sales type functions as well, you think about there's a certain amount of activity that starts at the top of the funnel, and then only a smaller amount as you go through the different layers in the process. As we think about a defense in depth or a layered approach to security, we think about attack surface reduction way at the top of this sort of funnel for reducing the amount of entry points or reducing the amount of risk at the top. So we start there. Then we apply active security controls that you just talked about, Chandra, which we typically think of as prevention, which is an attack's coming in and we're going to stop it so it doesn't get in. What you're saying, though, is we're going to expand the definition of prevention and make it inclusive of vulnerability management, the process itself, which is going to, frankly, reduce the workload on the active security controls, right? Because we should filter out by reducing the attack surface so that the active security controls have less work to do, and less possibility to fail. And then as we think about detection and response, which a tremendous amount of investment is going on today in the industry, sort of in this area. And in fact, why is that happening? Because prevention is not reducing enough of the attacks. Enough is getting through that detection and response has become a core strategy within security programs that continues to get bigger. More money is being poured into this space, and my little stick figures on the right-hand side represent people investment. So what's happening in most security organizations today is we're expanding the amount of people that are focused on detection and response. Why are we doing that? Because too many attacks are getting through the preventative controls up front in the process. So the scales have sort of tipped. For a long time, we were super focused on prevention, and we're gonna shrink the amount of attacks that get through, and only a very, very small number would make it through, and then we'd have less effort to spend on detection and response activities. Now, we're going in the other direction, where security strategies are now making heavy investments in both tools and technology, and sadly, people, which are now a combination of in-house resources, but almost every organization that I speak with also has now had to engage third-party service organizations as well, which has added a tremendous amount of cost and at some level a bit of complexity to the operational process of security operations itself. And then sort of course, on the very bottom of my funnel here is recovery initiatives. When people don't make it through the detection and response process and are unable to stop, now we're in cleanup, right? And we're in an IR recovery situation where we're either recovering from backups or some other means. But what's really important about this sort of overall picture is that when we invest more with improving capabilities at the top of the funnel, right? We shrink the need, the demand, and the potential risk curve here as well that occurs as potential threats flow down through the funnel. So there's some important pieces. There's a risk element to this picture, and there's also a cost, complexity, and just sort of overall people investment side of the equation here that gets out of balance when preventative controls aren't doing their job. So I like the fact that you've expanded the definition, and I also am excited that there's sort of a new level of innovation happening that you guys are focused on here at the sort of the top of this picture as well. Does all that resonate with you?
Certainly, Dave. So completely in line with what you've been saying here. So some of the stats that you put out early in some of the slides is really a proof that the preventative controls are not really working, because the attacks are passing through, and detection responses sometimes working and sometimes not working, and then you're paying the damage in the recovery part of it.
Yes. So interestingly, as I think about, because part of my life, I also focus on application security, and I'm just going to draw a parallel here. There's a ton of conversation in the AppSec world as organizations build out business applications to shift security left, and the point of the shift left movement in AppSec is by bringing more of the security mindset, the security focus earlier in the cycle, we end up with less remedial actions later in the process. And it's really very similar to the conversation we're having here. I mean, I guess if I flip this funnel on its side, when sort of the big part of the funnel was on the left, you could sort of have the same conversation about shifting risk management when it comes to prevention, detection, response left in this equation, and it would sort of align to the same types of conversation that we have as we talk about application security. And I bring this up only because this is not a new idea, right? So by addressing and finding issues earlier in the cycle, which is exactly what we're doing here, right? We're finding potential weaknesses in the infrastructure earlier in the process here. So what are the results of that? Well, so should be that the success rate of attacks goes down. It should be that it costs us less to resolve those from a security and IT operations vantage point as well. And so those principles remain as we look at vulnerability management in this sort of model here as well. So in your organization, well, let me start out. You're the founder of this company. So you founded this company based on some new ideas, and maybe you could just start out by talking just a little bit about when you think of innovation in this space, like where is your focus? Where did you start? What got you excited about creating this company and investing in this area?
Yeah. So it certainly makes sense, to innovate. I mean, move these up the funnel. The focus on the early part of the equation. So you talked about shift left. So there is continuous integration, continuous delivery. There is DevOps and DevSecOps coming in. So the whole idea there is, how do I not let these vulnerabilities pass through during the development into the production, right? So that's the focus there. Now, if you once the applications are deployed and they're running, then the vulnerability management and all the prevention strategy that I talked about comes in. And on the right side, you have the detection and response. So as you rightly said, there's a good amount of innovation happening both on the detection and response side as well as the shift left side. But the centerpiece is where the problem lies. And the vulnerability scanners or the assessment programs were sort of built decades ago, and the mindset continues to remain there. if you were to draw parallel, it is like the early age of antivirus products that existed a decade or 2 decades ago. So there's tremendous amount of improvement has taken place there in terms of consolidating, expanding the focus of detection, and also integrating the response capabilities into the same platform. And so where we are lagging today is in this vulnerability management or the attack surface reduction. So vulnerability scanners, typically you run a scan, takes about a week or months to put together an outcome, which is a report that runs into thousands of pages. And so as security administrators or the IT operations person, you have to go through each of these elements and really find out what are those patches that you may have to apply, what are those mitigation controls that you may have to apply to eliminate these vulnerabilities. And that again is a manual process, and typically most organizations take anywhere between 3 to 6 months to complete that activity. So on one hand, there are new vulnerabilities that are coming in on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, our reaction time has been large, and 3 to 6 months to fix a vulnerability, especially the high critical vulnerabilities that are being surfaced or uncovered these days. You need point in time sort of response. So this is where the gap is, and this is the gap that we found, and certainly is an opportunity for us to fill that gap. So why not look at doing what innovations that are taking place on the detection and response, or on the shift left movement as well. So why not apply the same principle here? In this era, when we are talking about ambient computing or autonomous computing, it certainly makes sense to tie these things together and make the machines more intelligent, and make the systems subsystems that feed one into the other and help them make the decisions, and probably deploy those decisions as well. So this is the opportunity that we saw in this vulnerability management side, and all our focus has been: can I consolidate? Can I automate? Can I bring down this gap that I talked about to a continuous mode, as against 3 to 6 months? So that is been our focus as part of SecPod.
So yeah, so and you mentioned this in the conversation. There's multiple point solutions that are required to support this process today, and in fact, most of those solutions are purchased through different vendors that have their different data models, their different user interfaces, and for the most part, it's left security and IT teams on their own to bring that data together, and then to provide a human level of analytics on top of that to make decisions based on the risk tolerance or risk posture within an organization, the most sort of critical or at least the best understanding people have about the criticality of assets along the way. And of course, what you just described makes a ton of sense to do together. So this picture just sort of lays out kind of the transformation between taking these separate processes, bringing them together into a more integrated approach platform, applying a common layer of analytics engine and data model to the problem set that it's here. But I have to ask, because if it were this easy, like why hasn't this happened to date? There's a heavy lift that's here for a lot of reasons, and it's not just the tech part of the problem. There are other challenges. One, and I'll just throw it out there because I'm certain it's on our listeners' minds. We have different objectives oftentimes when we're running an IT infrastructure. We're focused on availability and performance and growth and sort of all the objectives that align with IT, versus the security team is focused on risk mitigation and risk management, and those don't always align. So now we're trying to pull together potentially misaligned sets of objectives into a common process, a common technology and solution. How do we get past those challenges?
Yeah, so there's a number of things. So prior to answering that question, so if you look at prevention, it's not something that you would know. What you're trying to do with investing in prevention is that you're trying to reduce the attack surface. So the result of that is that less number of attacks. So you don't actually see the result, to quantify it, and people tend to ignore the value of investing in prevention. So that is one problem I see, and most of the people end up thinking detection and response is good enough, and we are catching most of the attacks, but that is not necessarily true, because we are seeing increasing number of attacks that are taking place. And each of these, the other thing is certainly the IT tools ecosystem. I mean, there are opportunities to create good category of different products. And so you have these products operating in silos. So as you rightly mentioned, so buying product from different vendors and they don't necessarily talk to each other. So there's no responsibility owned by a single vendor. So if I were to consider prevention as my need, that is one single need. So I'm not really necessarily looking at just getting visibility for the sake of it, right? So I'm ultimately looking at preventing the attacks. I'm not necessarily looking at I just want to know about the vulnerability, the real reason for understanding or knowing about the vulnerability is that I want to act upon those vulnerabilities. So, which means that vulnerability management has to feed into the mitigation engine. So, I think nobody took that responsibility, in my view, and vendors kept creating products in silos, and the organizations kind of adopted to that norm and ended up creating multiple teams that not necessarily talk to each other. So that is where I believe the problem sort of originates. So each of these teams are operating in silos, and products are also operating in silo. And most of the risk assessment side, the job or the role of that person is to necessarily find the problem, and it ends there. So the IT ops team have to take the responsibility of mitigating the problem, who do not understand risks, the vulnerabilities, or the impact of not mitigating. Right? So that is where the entire problem lies.
Yeah, so that makes a good sense to me. And the truth is, IT and security teams are working more closely together today, and they do want mechanisms to do so. And they already have to operate in sort of this continuous process or continuous cycle of operations and work together. And it's, again, running sort of parallels to the app dev side of the house. This is with the notion of DevSecOps, or sort of having a more integrated IT and security function or operation to work collaboratively along the way. So if we take a look at this as a more continuous process cycle, and a more automated approach to bringing these pieces together. You want to walk us through a little bit about what that cycle is going to look like?
Yeah, so prevention, as I mentioned, is one need. So for that one particular need, so these are different stages. One is getting visibility into the IT infrastructure. So that is a primary need for security. So it is essential that I have visibility to the entire IT infrastructure at any given point in time. The
And I'm
second,
sorry to interrupt, but so from that basically we're talking about asset discovery, right? And
yes,
inventory and classification and assess, like that's what you're talking about here, right? It's like
right,
it's the
yes, yes.
discovery
So
and the inventory of all of that.
yes. So it's important to know what is that something that you need to protect, right? So once I have that visibility is when I can really know what is in my IT system and what are the security controls that I must apply. So without having visibility, there is no security. So that is the primary need for the prevention layer. The second one is to really know.
I'm sorry to interrupt one more time. So I just want to be sure that I understand. You guys are solving that problem. You are also you're doing asset discovery and like that's part. I just want to, because so many people have talked about that as this, because it's this sort of emerging category in the security industry right now around
Yes.
this function as an isolated function, but you're not talking about it in those terms. You built this into your platform, correct?
Into the platform with the mindset that prevention is one investment that an organization must make, right? So it's an integrated platform with visibility as one of the requirements. So it is built into the same platform. I want to know. So we're not talking about integrating different products into this platform. So we are talking about everything being on the same platform. Right. So the second requirement is to perform a risk assessment, knowing vulnerabilities with the definition that I kind of laid out early on what vulnerabilities are. It's not just the software application vulnerabilities, but also missing configurations, missing patches, anomalies, and other security exposure. So again, this needs to be a continuous process. The reason for that is you have umpteen number of vulnerabilities that are being identified day to day, and changes are also taking place on a day-to-day basis within the IT environment. So settings that I have applied today might not be true tomorrow. So it is essential that you make this into an automated continuous process. And the third step in this is to mitigate. Now, we have uncovered so many vulnerabilities of different kinds. How do I mitigate these vulnerabilities? So one obvious thing is to apply patches that can eliminate a good number of these vulnerabilities that are identified. Equally important is also having the ability to fix the misconfigurations and other security deviations and anomalies that I talked about. So asset exposure, for example, so do have mechanism to act upon those. Maybe I need to uninstall unauthorized software application. Maybe I need to stop certain services that are not supposed to be running within the environment. So all of these are security controls that go beyond traditional patching in order to truly mitigate the vulnerabilities. So all of these three primary need must be integrated into one single uh, console, if I have to visualize in a product term. And this needs to be an automated process. This needs to be a continuous day-to-day run process as against a scan button that I need to press and go through the exercise for a week or weeks together in order to, first of all, identify the vulnerability. So that cannot work anymore. This needs to be an automated process. It needs to be a continuous process that is being carried out. One is know what is in, find the problems that are there within the environment and mitigate those problems. And can I automate that? Now, can these, different systems or rather subsystems within this primary system, can they feed into one another? Can visibility provide input into vulnerability assessment? Can vulnerability assessment feed into prioritization, for example, and then can it feed into the mitigation engine? So all of these need to talk to one to another. And these are machines talking and not the human interface that I'm talking about. So it is one system talking to another system and all feeding that information out so that I can know the problem, understand the problem, and solve the problem. So all of this needs to be within an integrated uh, platform.
And just because there's a closed loop here from remediation to visibility, I just want to ask the question around governance and compliance regulations too. For those people operating in regulated industries, assumedly, because you have this sort of continuous visibility of progress here, you can also use this to help support your governance and compliance programs as well.
Yes, so most of these compliance requirements today it needs to be at any given point in time. It's not like I would want to achieve SOC 2 compliance today, but tomorrow my system is totally different, so you're not compliant anymore. So that is where the biggest problem comes. So equally important, I mean, similarly, you have PCI or HIPAA or any of these. So these cannot be a one-time activity. This needs to be an automated process. So every time I want to be sure if my SOC 2 controls are in place, I just need to uh, extract the proof points from this platform and demonstrate that compliance. So otherwise, it is not a continuous process. Otherwise, the environment that you're operating in today is not the same tomorrow. So you've already um, fallen out of compliance. So
Yeah,
that's
totally
the
makes sense.
challenge.
Totally makes sense. And so this wheel, this process wheel, might not actually look very foreign to our viewers on the webinar today, because most organizations have to go through these steps. The difference here is the approach that you're using brings it all together, so people aren't doing manual layers of analysis in between the different steps in the process that are here. I wanted to include just a quick screenshot about what you're doing here, just to sort of bring home the point that you brought this together in a single view, to just sort of reinforce the fact that you're not integrating a number of siloed solutions. It's all in one, correct?
Yes, it is all in one. So we have one single console, one platform that brings together multiple tools that is not integrating from different vendors, but natively built. It is essential to have that native integration because you can build that communication seamlessly. So otherwise, each of them are talking different languages, and it's impossible to almost integrate them and present that single console in a simplistic manner. So complexity is the biggest problem for security. So simplicity is the way to go, and that is what we have been able to achieve with one single integrated console with multiple tools coming together on a single console and taking you through that journey of providing visibility, uh, discovering the vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and all types of vulnerabilities that we talked about, and then helping you prioritize those issues, and then feeding you into the mitigation engine that goes beyond just applying the patches, but also applying the other security controls that are fallen out of compliance or deviations that you expect not to have within that environment.
Got it. And while you're talking about multiple tools, I just want to clarify, because there are other people that are addressing this problem that might use that same language and say multiple tools, as in they're integrating multiple tools. You actually said that too. But I think your data store is common though, correct? You're like your data structure, your analytics engine, you're sharing that. You're not literally integrating multiple third-party tools, that it's all built in.
All built in within the same console. The data points are, or each of these tools are operating on the same data point and communicating with each other. Natively built tools, not integrated from different consoles. Yeah, I understand where this question is coming. The new category of products being introduced almost very frequently. There's a risk-based vulnerability assessment platform that sorts of picks up the data from the traditional vulnerability scanners and then help you prioritize. But then you're adding more complexity in that whole ecosystem, which is already complicated. And as I said, complexity is the biggest problem. So what we've done here is to bring all of them together into single console. Each of them are operating with the same data point. The purpose of each of these tools could be different. One is to provide visibility, which is essential, as I said. So our asset exposure tool, for example, here gives you continuous visibility to the entire IT infrastructure. And then you have our vulnerability management tool, which takes the same discovered asset information and then runs vulnerability scanning. This vulnerability scanner runs every day. Scan typically takes about 5 minutes to complete, so there is no resource overhead, and day-to-day basis it is covering. Our vulnerability intelligence database is getting updated every day, so it is not, there's no delay in our coverage. Similarly, our configuration management and compliance management tool is again running the scans and figuring out the deviations within the same engine. Then patch management takes that data points that are discovered as vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and all of them. Our patch management system helps mitigate those within the same console. So similarly, we have other security control mitigation within the endpoint management platform and also our endpoint query and response as number of actions that you can apply which go beyond patching. So all of these 6 tools are operating on a single data points feeding into one another. Our server is that analytics engine that kind of correlates our source information with what is gathered from every device, be it endpoint devices or network equipments or servers or even the cloud infrastructure running on different operating system or family of operating systems. So we sort of consolidate all of them into one single um, source of data and then apply that correlation to really find out these vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, deviations, anomalies. All of them are coming together. I mean, all of them are being discovered with from the same data point.
Excellent, excellent. So we're getting close to time. So let's wrap up with this. There's a lot here. And given that most organizations have multiple tools in place already today to support this process, if I think this is an interesting net new approach, how do I get started? Can I replace a piece of my equation and start to bring up this new platform approach over a period of time? Tell me about what's the on-ramp process typically for your customers, and how have they approached either supplementing or replacing and ultimately getting to this more integrated, advanced vulnerability management approach?
Yeah, I think what we see in our customer base or in the market today is like some of our customers are having some sort of maybe a vulnerability scanning is there being done like periodically, maybe once in a month or once in a quarter, and there are isolated patch management system in place. So again, patches are being applied once in a month or quarterly type of thing, and that is essentially not working because you're not solving the problem that you went to or meant to solve. So what we see in our customer base is people are looking at replacing their entire stack and moving into our platform together. Uh, you've sort of eliminated the need for having to invest in multiple tools and buy one investment and rather invest in one platform that consolidates all of them. But there are also other customers who are deeply, some things are already working, and the change is always comes at a cost. So you cannot necessarily replace everything all out at one go. So there are people who look at, can I take patch management alone? Can I take configuration management or compliance management module alone? So we have that model built into our platform as well. So you can essentially enable different modules and only work with that module and over a period of time have a transition plan to migrate into this particular platform over a period of time. And we have also seen some of our customers, some of the larger ones, have identified a specific, portion of the infrastructure that is very critical for them, and they've deployed within that environment. And you become comfortable with the entire process, and over a period of time, transition into this new platform that we have built. So we have mixed sort of customers who are in different stages or phases into the migration.
Nice. Thank you for that. And I guess last, how can people find out more information if the concept of transforming vulnerability management is something that people want to begin to invest in? How do they learn more? How do they get started? There's some information here on the screen. Any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, so all the thoughts that I sort of expressed, I think it is neatly laid out in our website, secpod.com. And we also have a free trial set up for anyone to try our product. So if you were to go to secpod.com, so there is a try for free option where people can deploy it on a few systems and really get the value. And typically what we see is when some of our trial customers deploy it on in a test bed. So we've seen at least 300 to 400 different critical vulnerabilities being uncovered per device. And these are some of the customers who have already invested in vulnerability management solutions of different kind. But as you mentioned rightly at the beginning of this session, it's not really effective. And it kind of shows why it is not effective. So that's people to explore it, try it out, reach out to us, and is certainly happy to take them through the journey.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Chandra, for joining me and for sharing this exciting work that you're doing. Boy, more than ever, we need innovation in this space. And thank you for carrying the flag and driving this agenda forward. As security teams struggle with all the other aspects and complexity of their environment, getting this piece right, improving this piece of the equation, back to our funnel image. Like when we can cut more out of the top of the funnel, the implications of that have such significant benefits from both a risk reduction perspective and from an overall cost and complexity and investment reduction as well. So thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Dave. Wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me here, and good day to all of our listeners.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.